5 lions controlled the valley, and no one knew why. In the dry heartland of New Mexico, where dust devils danced through canyons, and even time seemed to move slower, something unnatural had taken root. Jackson Pierce, a 58-year-old veteran ranger, had faced wildfires, floods, and fugitives. But nothing prepared him for this. 5 rogue male lions, somehow roaming free across a restricted nature reserve, striking with surgical precision. They didn't hunt for food. They moved with strategy, with purpose. It wasn't fear he felt. It was awe, and a gnawing question. What were they trying to protect? And then came the roar that changed everything. If you're curious about what happened next and love stories of wilderness, mystery, and survival, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Jackson had hoped it was just a fluke, a freak migration, maybe a zoo transport gone wrong. But deep down, he knew better. These lions weren't lost. They were waiting. 2 weeks earlier, one of the patrol units had been ambushed near Black Mesa, not by poachers or criminals, but by the lions themselves. Their truck had been overturned, 3 rangers trapped inside, helpless. Yet, strangely, not a single man was harmed. The lions circled the wreck for hours, growling low, eyes burning through the shattered windshield. And then they left. Jackson couldn't sleep since that day. Something primal had shifted. The land felt different, as if holding its breath. Tracks appeared in places no lion should be. Camps were found torn apart. No food missing, no blood spilled. Just a message. You are not welcome here. That morning, as the sun poured over the valley in sheets of gold, Jackson stood by his patrol jeep, hand resting on the tranquilizer rifle slung across his chest. The plan was simple, too simple. Lure them to the riverbed using sedated prey, then fire and tag them for research. But his gut screamed otherwise. Halfway through Devil's Ravine, the radio crackled. Then, a sound that froze his blood. A roar, deep, guttural, not of hunger, but of warning. Seconds later, chaos exploded behind them. Shouts, crushing metal, a scream swallowed by dust. Jackson hit the brakes, heart pounding. He stepped out slowly, not knowing what he'd find. But he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't a hunt. It was a standoff. From the top of the ravine, shadows moved. One by one, they emerged. 5 lions, all male, their golden coats streaked with dust and sunlight. They didn't charge, not yet. They stood on the ridge like sentinels, eyes locked on the humans below. Jackson gripped his rifle, knuckles white, but he didn't raise it. He couldn't. Something in their stance, measured, almost military, stopped him cold. These weren't frantic animals acting on instinct. No, these lions were waiting. Then, like a signal had been given, one lion leapt. The others followed. Chaos. Darts flew. Shouts rang out. But the lions didn't scatter. They flanked, moved, regrouped, as if they'd trained for this. Jackson fired, missed. Another ranger slipped. One young officer froze, eyes wide with terror as a lion lunged over him, only to land inches away and let out a deafening roar before vanishing into the brush. Why hadn't it killed him? The ambush wasn't meant to harm. It was meant to warn. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. The lions returned to the ridge, forming a tight line, heads held high, not attacking, not fleeing, just watching. Jackson's heart thundered. The dust settled. The air was still. And that's when it happened. A small figure stepped into the clearing. Barefoot, hair in pigtails, holding something red. A child. Jackson's breath caught in his throat. Where the hell had she come from? No one moved. Not the rangers, not the lions, not even the wind. The child, maybe 6 years old, stood barefoot in the middle of the clearing, her skin streaked with dust, her face unreadable. In her tiny hand, she held a red cloth. It fluttered softly with the breeze, like a forgotten flag from a different world. Jackson couldn't speak. No one could. The lead lion, larger than the others, his mane dark and thick like wildfire smoke, turned his massive head toward her. He took one step forward, then another, and then he sat down. The other lions followed. It was like watching a king kneel. The girl walked closer. calm as if drawn by something ancient. She stopped inches from the lion's face, reached out her hand and offered the red cloth. The lion didn't growl. He didn't move. He just lowered his head and pressed his snout gently into her palm. It was holy. Jackson lowered his rifle without realizing it. One of the younger rangers sobbed. Another dropped to his knees. They had seen these lions chase trucks, pin grown men to the ground, tear steel apart like paper. And now they bowed to a child, a barefoot girl holding a piece of cloth. She turned her head slowly and looked straight at Jackson. Her eyes didn't hold fear. They held memory. Something about her was hauntingly familiar. And deep inside, Jackson knew. This wasn't the first time she'd stood among lions. Jackson's mind reeled. The girl's face was soft, innocent, but her eyes, they carried years, memories no child should hold. And then it hit him. The cloth, that red cloth, in her hand. Frayed at the edges, almost faded pink now. He'd seen it before, years ago. A fire had torn through the village of Pine Hollow on the edge of the reserve. A toddler had gone missing. They searched for days, drones, dogs, volunteers. Nothing. Only a scrap of red cloth found tangled in the low branches near the lion corridor. No body, no signs of struggle, just disappearance. The case had haunted him. The girl's name was Emily Kesler. Her parents moved away after the fire, swallowed by grief. Everyone assumed she had died, but now, right here in front of him, that same cloth. He felt his knees weaken. He whispered, "Emily?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned back toward the lion, the massive one who'd nuzzled her hand. She placed her palm against his chest, and he responded like a trained guardian, calm, still, watching Jackson. "He saved me," she finally said, her voice no louder than the wind. "His name is Kale." The name sent goosebumps up Jackson's spine. In ancient Lakota, Kale meant protector of the earth. These lions didn't just find her. They raised her, protected her, and now they had brought her back. But for what? And why now? Something deeper was stirring in this land, something beyond biology, beyond explanation. Jackson took a step forward, heart pounding, because if this truly was Emily Kesler, then the lions hadn't just saved a child. They'd saved a voice the wild had chosen to speak through. Jackson crouched slowly, careful not to spook either the girl or the lions. He couldn't take his eyes off her. This little girl who'd vanished into smoke and shadows 4 years ago, now standing tall beside beasts no man dared approach. "How long have you been with them?" he asked gently. Emily didn't look at him. Her eyes were on Kyle, her fingers still pressed into the lion's chest like it was the only heartbeat she trusted. "They found me," she said, "after the fire. I don't think they meant to, but they didn't leave." Her voice was rough, like it hadn't been used in years. But there was no fear in it, just memory. "Kale brought food. The others stayed close when I slept. They listened to me when I was scared." Jackson swallowed hard. This wasn't just a survival story. This was something sacred, something ancient. He'd heard native elders whisper legends of spirit animals guarding lost children, of wild things choosing who they protected, not out of instinct, but intention. And now, standing in this dust-choked clearing, with a girl raised by lions speaking in quiet certainty, Jackson wondered if those old stories weren't legends at all. He glanced at his team. Most of them were still frozen in disbelief. One ranger made the sign of the cross. Another stared wide-eyed at Emily like she was a ghost. Jackson turned back to her. "Why did they bring you back now?" Emily's expression shifted. "Because something's wrong," she said, "and they know I'm the only one you'll believe." Jackson's breath caught. "What do you mean something's wrong?" he asked, his voice tight, careful. Emily didn't blink. "They can't sleep. Not for weeks. The ground trembles at night. There's a noise, down deep. It hurts them." Kale let out a low growl, as if confirming her words. Jackson exchanged glances with Ranger Diaz, who stepped forward, brows furrowed. "You think it's machines," Emily cut in. "Big ones. Not like trucks. These dig. And it's getting worse." It hit Jackson like a freight train. A year ago, there had been whispers, rumors of illegal mining creeping into federal land. A tip had come in about a rogue operation beyond the mapped boundaries. But when the team went out, they found nothing, just broken brush and quiet lies. Now, it made sense. The lions hadn't turned rogue. They were reacting, responding to something tearing their world apart. And the reason they brought Emily back? Because she was the only bridge between man and beast. "Can you take us there?" he asked softly. Emily looked at Cale, then nodded. "He'll lead. But you have to promise. You won't hurt anyone." Jackson hesitated. "Anyone. There are people out there," she said, "digging. But they're not just miners. They're running from something else." A chill rippled through the air. Jackson didn't know what was waiting in that forest, but he was starting to believe the lions weren't the scariest thing out there anymore. At first light, the forest was breathless. Jackson stood beside the lead jeep, watching Cale pace the tree line like a commander preparing for war. The rest of the lions flanked him in a wide arc, their movements graceful, deliberate, like shadows flowing across the earth. Emily sat between Jackson and Ranger Diaz, wrapped in the same worn blanket from the night before. Her fingers clutched a small leather pouch tied with frayed red string, something she hadn't let go of since her return. No one asked what was inside. Behind them, 2 more jeeps rolled in, carrying a small team, veterinarians, trackers, and backup rangers. But no one led this mission. Not Jackson, not the techs. Kyle did. They moved for miles, deeper than any ranger had patrolled in years. The terrain grew hostile, wild. Old dry creek beds twisted like scars. Entire groves stood dead, their roots exposed. Then Cale stopped. A single guttural grunt rumbled from his chest. Emily placed her hand on the dashboard. "We're here," she said. Jackson stepped out, signaling the others to wait. He and Diaz followed Cale through the brush, creeping low. What they saw on the other side of the hill made Jackson's blood run cold. Tents, half-collapsed shipping containers, drills, excavators, and children, playing barefoot in the dust beside leaking barrels. It wasn't just a mine, it was a settlement. Families hiding in the wilderness, wounded by poverty, fear, or worse. Jackson looked at the damage carved into the earth, then at Cale, whose eyes locked on his, unwavering. "This is what they were trying to stop," Jackson whispered. "Not just destruction, but abandonment." The lions hadn't declared war. They had drawn a line, and now Jackson had to choose which side he was truly on. Before Jackson could speak, a rusted barrel rolled down the embankment with a loud metallic clatter. Silence shattered. Shouts erupted from the camp. A man with a rifle pointed toward the ridge. "We're made! Move!" Jackson barked. Then came the roar. It was thunder and rage and something older than language. Kyle burst from the brush like a phantom of the wild. The rest of the lions followed, fanning out in terrifying formation. But they didn't attack the people. They targeted the machines. One lion slammed into a generator, sending sparks flying. Another leapt onto a tent, ripping it down in a flurry of canvas and dust. Cale knocked over a barrel, with precision, roaring into the open sky as families scrambled in panic. A woman screamed and gathered her child. Men dropped tools and fled. Even the armed guard tossed his weapon before disappearing into the trees. Within minutes, the entire settlement was empty. The lions had done what no task force ever could. Not with bullets, not with orders, but with presence. When Cale returned to the hilltop, his mane soaked in sweat, he didn't growl or strut. He simply stood, watching the smoke curl into the rising sun. Jackson met his eyes. This wasn't an act of aggression. It was a line in the sand, a warning, do not return. And somehow, that message spoke louder than any human voice ever could. Back at the station, no one spoke for a long while. The dust clung to their boots, and the silence hung heavy. Like the forest itself was still holding its breath. Jackson stood just outside the infirmary, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the bench where Emily sat. Her legs swung slightly beneath the wool blanket, that same red string pouch cradled in her lap. She stared at the treetops, humming a low, strange tune, soft and steady, almost like a lullaby. Ranger Diaz finally broke the silence. "What was that out there, Jack? That wasn't just a bust." Jackson nodded, his voice low. "Number that was a message, delivered by something bigger than us." Inside, Anita, one of the younger wildlife officers, was already uploading the footage, not just of the mining camp or the hidden families, but of Kale and the Pride standing guard like sentinels of an ancient order. The video was powerful, too powerful. Jackson knew it would go viral, but he also knew they had to be careful. This wasn't about internet fame. It was about truth. Emily didn't seem to care about any of it. She just kept humming. When Jackson finally asked what the song was, she said softly, "It's what they used to hum when we slept. Back when the nights were safe." Jackson felt something shift in his chest. This girl didn't just survive. She carried the memory of a world we'd forgotten how to hear. The next morning, they returned. With state wildlife officials, federal investigators, and backup teams in tow, the rangers led them back to the clearing. But when they arrived, it was empty. Tents gone, machines stripped, people vanished. All that remained were deep scars in the earth, a few plastic scraps caught in the underbrush, and the lingering scent of oil and ash. The creek, once choked with chemical runoff, had begun to trickle again. Small frogs clung to damp stones. Birds darted between low branches. Nature was reclaiming. But the lions, they were gone too. No paw prints, no rustling in the brush, just silence. Emily didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She simply walked down to the edge of the creek and placed her red string pouch atop a smooth, flat rock. Jackson approached quietly, kneeling beside her. "What was in it?" he asked gently. She smiled, a sad kind of knowing. "Everything they gave me. I gave it back." It wasn't a farewell. It was a thank you, a closing of the circle. And Jackson, he understood. These lines hadn't come to make a scene. They came to deliver a message, then disappear like guardians, who show up only when the world forgets how to listen. What happened out there wasn't a miracle in the traditional sense. It was something older, wilder, and maybe more human than we'd like to admit. Weeks passed. The station returned to routine, on the surface at least. But something had changed. Patrols were quieter now. Rangers walked slower through the woods, spoke softer on the radios. They began avoiding certain clearings, instinctively, like the land itself had redrawn the lines. Jackson noticed it most in the silence, not the empty kind, but the reverent kind, like the forest was holding memory in its roots, like every gust of wind might carry the echo of pause through tall grass. Emily stayed close to the station those first few days, always watching the horizon. When the other rangers asked if she wanted to go home, she'd just smile and say, "I already am." And then, one evening, just after the last patrol checked in, something happened. Emily stood by the old watchtower, shielding her eyes from the fading light. Anita followed her gaze, then froze. Across the golden field, barely visible in the dusk, stood 5 lions, not moving, not hunting, just watching. Kale stood tallest, mane glowing, like fire in the twilight. His breath was steady, his eyes locked on the girl. Emily didn't run. She didn't cry. She knelt slowly, placed her hand on the earth, and whispered just loud enough for the wind to carry it. "Thank you." Then, one by one, the lions turned and disappeared into the tall grass, their shapes dissolving like spirits returning to the wild. And just like that, they were gone. But what they left behind wasn't just a memory, it was a legacy. Years passed. The scars left by machines began to heal, replaced by tall grasses, young trees, and the return of songbirds no one had heard in decades. What was once a forgotten corner of wilderness became something sacred, a place no longer charted by maps, but by memory. Locals started calling it the Guardian Path, not because of what had happened there, but because of who had protected it. The lions weren't feared anymore. They were honored, quietly, respectfully, like ancient sentries of the land. Every year on the same day she first returned, Emily would come back. No cameras, No interviews. Just her, walking barefoot to the creek's edge with something simple. Sometimes a flower, sometimes a smooth stone, sometimes nothing at all. One year, a reporter found her and asked the question people still whispered, "Do you really believe they remembered you?" Emily didn't hesitate. Her answer was soft but resolute. "They didn't just remember me," she said. "They reminded me who I was." That was the gift Kyle and the others had given her. Not just survival, not just protection, but identity. In a world that tried to shape her, quiet her, and tell her to forget the wild and grow up, the lions had done the opposite. They taught her that sometimes the fiercest protectors don't wear armor, they wear fur. And sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with noise. They come with silence and trust and love. One of the most profound lessons from this story is the quiet power of connection between human and animal, memory and place, silence and truth. In a world that often rewards loudness, control, and dominance, this tale reminds us that there is strength in gentleness and wisdom in listening. The lions, once feared as threats, revealed themselves to be guardians, protectors acting not out of rage, but out of reverence for the land and for the life they had once saved. For older audiences who have lived through decades of noise, change, and struggle, there's a quiet truth here. Sometimes, the most meaningful legacies we leave behind are not in what we conquer, but in what we protect. Emily's journey, shaped by memory and survival, teaches us that identity is not always found in resumes or roles, but in the moments we choose to remember who we are and where we come from. As we age, perhaps the question isn't what we leave behind, but whether we've honored what truly mattered. The people, places, and creatures who gave us love without asking for anything in return. In that, there is peace. In that, there is purpose.